Greetings to everybody. I would like to introduce the moderator first, and he will take over. Our moderator for this session, Puzzling Personality, our 26th intergenerational meeting, is Ferhat Hüseyinov. Please, Ferhat, go ahead.
Hello to everyone. I welcome you to our 26th integrational meeting. And I'm so happy to present our speaker, Ramin, because he was the most active member of our group. And he did a lot of helps to me as well. And he also has recently, I'm happy to say that he has recently completed his medical degree at Putra Malaysia, and he's now our doctor members. And he's waiting for his compulsory service in Malaysia. And he has keen interest in psychiatry, especially in area of psychoanalysis, adult psychiatry. And his hobbies is playing guitar, and he's also amateur photograph. And I really appreciate him presenting this topic with us, and I am really waiting for him.
Thank you very much, Ferhat and Dr. Trashkun. And thank you very much to Seed for having me here today as a speaker for once. So let me just share my screen and I think we can dive right in if that's all right with everyone. Okay. While I'm preparing my screen sharing, do note that I am just still a small fry in this field of psychiatry, so I'm by no means an expert. So correct me if you have to along the way, and let's have a good discussion on this topic of personality. Okay. Uh, is the screen sharing all good? Just a thumbs up would be fine. All right, that's good. Okay. So we know that every good medical presentation begins with a case vignette, and that's why I have prepared a case vignette. Okay, here we go. So, imagine you're working at your personal practice and a client walks in. He's a 21-year-old man. He's very reluctant to see a psychiatrist, although he's been pushed many times by his counselor. And upon arrival, he announces that he feels he is fine. He has no problems. The only reason he came to this session is on the deal that his parents will get off his back. And while his parents are present at the session, he actually states in front of his parents that he knows that he relies on his parents for financial support, but he does not need them emotionally. He's been recommended to see a psychiatrist because he's been found to spread malicious rumors about his teachers, specifically in classes where he was not performing up to par. Personally, he did not think that his poor performance was a problem. And instead, he feels that his theatrical successes were being overlooked. And in his view, everything was all right. He admits that he is aware that those rumors were false, but he does not have any remorse and concern in any way about the teachers in which he spread those rumors about. On mental state assessment, he's found to be very distant. He likes engaging in intellectual conversations, but he gets cynical and patronizing during the session, especially in moments where he's unable to outwit the attending doctor. So this is kind of a scenario in which we might encounter such a client, such a patient in our practice in the future, in which he has some, you know, that something's not quite right, but it does not fulfill, it does not really fit the presentation of the slightly more common mental illnesses that we are aware of, like depressive disorders or other mood disorders or any anxiety disorders. You realize that there's something not quite right about his personality. This is not an actual photo of this client. Okay. So during this presentation, I'd like us all to discuss these few areas. So just have a quick introduction to this, broad topic of personality itself. We'll go through some of the controversies that arise when we are talking about personality. We will have a touch and go about psychopathy and its relation to certain uh, personality disorders. And at the end, we'll have some takeaway messages that we can all bring back to our own practice. Okay, so diving right on in. What is personality? Now, during this course of the introduction, we will have a touch and go about the nature versus nurture debate, but let's put that aside for now. The word personality in the English language is thought to have derived from Latin, the Latin word personalis, which means of a person. If maybe Ferhat or Dr. Choshkun have the etymology for the word in the Turkish equivalent, maybe you can let us know later on as well. Right? So let's go through some of the definitions of the word personality or definitions of personality that I have come across. So this first one talks about personality as enduring patterns of behavior and inner experiences involving basically cognition, affectivity, interpersonal relationships, and impulse control. I think you'll all be familiar with this because this is our clinical definition of personality. And it is when there's defects or imbalances in two or more of these domains that we usually classify a person as having a personality disorder. Yes. The second definition that I came across talks about personality as the complex of characteristics that distinguishes an individual or even a nation or a group, especially the totality of an individual's behavioral and emotional characteristics. This takes a broader approach. So you know that it's from a dictionary, it's from Merriam-Webster's definition of personality. And the final definition that I would like to bring forward is from the book aptly titled Personality by Jerry M. Berger, who talks about personality as consistent behavior patterns and interpersonal processes originating within the individual. Right? This is a book lover's definition of personality. So we can actually sum it up to personality as being the sum of the ways in which an individual reacts and interacts with others. And in fact, in the field of organizational behavior, it's found to be the aggregate of a person's feeling, thinking, behavior, and responses to different situations and people. Personality is important because it differentiates us from one another. Of course, Ferhat may have a different personality to me. Dr. Choshkun will have a different personality to me. We will all have different personalities from each other. So, understanding someone's personality, especially when they're your client or your patient, it can help us because it gives us clues as to how they are likely to react when they are put in a variety of situations in their life. So, coming to personality, there are many personality inventories and there are many components to personality itself. Two of the more widely accepted inventories are the Big Five or the five factor or ocean or canoe personality inventory, which has five factors, and the Hexaco personality inventory, which has an added sixth factor in addition to the five from the Big Five. So let's just briefly explore what each of these components are talking about. So I would like to start with openness. All right. So openness refers to how open an individual is to experiencing new things. So how open they are to trying new things. And the people who score higher on the openness scale, they tend to be more imaginative. They are drawn towards unconventional ideas or people. They like to immerse themselves in new things, new adventures. And those who are low They stray away from these radical ideas. They don't really uh, display uh, extreme curiosity that much. Moving on to conscientiousness, those who are higher on the scale of conscientiousness tend to be more um, they tend to be more delicate when making difficult decisions. They aim for perfection and accuracy, and they prefer to be more organized with their time and with their surroundings. And whereas those who are low tend to let errors slide, they're more flexible, they make their decisions more impulsively. As for extroversion and introversion, I think this is quite a discussed topic even in the general public domain. Those who are extroverts, they thrive or in social situations, whereas those who are more introverted tend to be a little more introspective and they feel more depleted in social situations. There is no good or bad. It's just how your personality is. The next on the list would be agreeableness. So people who are high on this scale, tend to be a little more open to compromising, um, and they are found to have managed their temper better. Whereas those who are lower, it's on the opposite end. They may not always manage their anger that well, and they may be more critical of um, new ideas. And as for neuroticism or emotionality, people with high scores on this domain tend to be more anxious, but they also feel more empathy towards others, and they have more fear towards physical dangers. Whereas those on the lower end of it tend to be calmer, appearing a little more distant, maybe even cold towards others. And if we jump over to the hexaco, you'll notice that the five of it are pretty much similar, and the added one is honesty, humility, which talks about those who are high on this humility, honesty scale tend to try not to break the rules. They are not rebellious. They do not attempt to deceive others, and vice versa for those who score lower on these traits. So these are just some of the aspects that we have studied in personality, but there have been countless traits of personality that still need studying, and we've barely scratched the surface about personality as a whole. Now, let me just have a look at our Zoom participants. Okay, looks like Ferhat and Dr. Choshkun do not have the looks as in this slide here, which is a good sign. So I'm not losing you. But we do need to ask ourselves, why? Why do we need to study personality? Why do we need to know about personality as a whole? So personality is important as a predisposition. We have found that personality can actually modify an individual's response to stressful events. In fact, personality is a risk factor for self harm and other harmful behaviors as well. Personality is highly associated with certain mental health conditions as well. Secondly, personality as a pathoplastic factor. Patho meaning pathological, abnormal, disease process, and plastic referring to molding or changing or evolving. And it's found to be a two-way process where personality itself can contribute to unusual features of a disorder. Pers- um, so, for example, an individual who has more of an obsessional personality may present with rumination and inhibition as the presentation of their depressive episode. And on the flip side, the mental health condition itself can actually exaggerate certain personality traits itself. And finally, personality in relation to treatment itself. We understand that certain personality types may be more prone to irritation and frustration, and In some cases, there may be an unstable relationship with the therapist or the psychiatrist who's seeing them. They may be perfectly fine and cooperative during one session, and during the next session, they are less cooperative, they are more distant with their therapist. So, and another thing is tackling interpersonal relationships in addition to whatever condition they are experiencing at that moment. And personality is an important factor when considering interpersonal relationships. And we finally come to the concept of nature versus nurture. Nature is talking about the genes that are inherent within us. And there's a lot of studies, there are a lot of genes that have been theorized, and some have been identified to directly influence personality and even psychopathy in the future. In the further slides, I will be talking about that as well. And nurture is talking about the environmental factors, the stressors throughout a person's life that impact, that influence how the person um, experiences their life and would later develop to react in certain ways, in particular with their social relationships and interpersonal relationships and so on. I think one good way where we can have a good idea of the balance between nature and nurture is by having a look at this guy. Ferhat, do you know who this guy is?
Captain America?
Exactly. This is Captain America. But if I were to ask you, what makes Captain America Captain America? Is it his innate values that are within him, even before he, consumed even before he was administered the super soldier serum? Or is it the super soldier serum itself that made him the hero that we all know and love?
Probably both of them.
Farhad, you're killing it. You're spot on. How I like to think of it is both. Because could you imagine if Captain America had only been given the super soldier serum, but he did not have any of the values that Steve Rogers had before? Yes, you would end up with a very strong, very resilient individual, but he's not Captain America. He's someone who does not have the values of Captain America. It's just a person with a super soldier serum. And we've seen the side effects of that, for example, in Red Skull and all that. But that's fictional characters. On the flip side, someone who has the values but was never administered the super soldier serum is just another guy with the super soldier serum who can be knocked out in 2 punches. So to make a Captain America, you need two sides of the same coin. And that's exactly how nature and nurture presents itself, where neither nature nor nurture is stronger than the other, and both factors actually play a critical role in the person we actually become. In fact, they interact with each other throughout our life. And personality is not unique. There are many other areas, such as the origins of homosexuality, influences on intelligence, IQ, and even in sports, where this debate of nature versus nurture still rages on. The fact of the matter is there's no simple way to answer this question. There are a multitude of forces that impact personality and the human development. So the question I'd like to ask is, how do our genes modulate the environmental influences, and how do these environmental factors influence our genes as a whole in return? And there is no answer as of now. There's no definitive answer, but I hope that we, as a human race, will be able to answer this in the future. This right here is just an artificial intelligence prompt that I typed in, where I typed in nature versus nurture. I think artificial intelligence is good, but they're not going to be taking over the world anytime soon. Probably because they lack personality. Okay, so moving on to the controversies when we discuss personality. 615,264,000 people are estimated to have personality disorders worldwide. But how many of these people have we seen in our practice? Not many of them actually present themselves forward because most of the time they do not think that there's anything wrong with them. So why is personality and personality disorders very controversial? Well, our understanding of personality is ever evolving. As we discussed in the earlier slides, there are a multitude of factors that impact personality itself. So our language that we use when we are talking about personalities is also evolving. Controversies arise when there are disagreements, when understanding personality disorders, which we will go through. There's a lot of misrepresentation and sensationalism by the media and even in film. There are labels assigned to personality disorders, which can be stigmatizing, and it has its association with criminal activity for certain personality disorders. So there are differing points of view. In general, there are two schools of thought where one group believes that personality by definition is unchangeable, it's pervasive, it's enduring, and that there's little evidence that psychiatric help can actually benefit individuals with personality disorders, and that people with personality disorders should be responsible for their behavior. And they believe that psychiatry is being asked to deal with something that is essentially a social problem. Whereas the other group believes that people with personality disorders suffer from the symptoms that are related to their disorder. And we know that symptoms can be treated. On the other hand, personality disorders also have high rates of suicide, self-harm, other forms of premature death, and even has its relation with other mental illnesses. There are certain treatment approaches which have been proven to be effective. For example, dialectical behavioral therapy, which has shown to be beneficial in some patients with borderline personality disorder. And I think the bottom line is that the problem is that we do not, it's not that we can't help these patients with personality disorders, but that our current treatment plans do not provide the type of care that is necessary to help them in the first place. So it's something that we should still strive to develop in the future. Hopefully, these groups of people do not end up arguing up until that. But yes, the fact of the matter is that most personality disorders are egosyntonic, where their behaviors, their values, their feelings are in harmony with their lifestyle, their practices. It's basically, this is who I am. That's my personality. I don't need to change. Why do you want to change who I am? And this can be a challenge when we are dealing with people with personality disorders as well. And of course, from my personal experience in medical school, when I was reading up on personality disorders, that whole topic, there were some reference books which actually put labels on the different clusters of personalities, where they referred to cluster A as being odd and eccentric, cluster B being dramatic, erratic, cluster C being anxious and fearful. And in my own personal opinion, I think these labels are not helpful, and they can even increase the stigma and personal bias that you have towards patients who present with a type of personality disorder. And in fact, it might even cloud your judgment, and you might not realize that a new symptom that has popped up is not just attributed to their personality itself. Yes. And of course, what doesn't help the cause for personality disorders is the fact that there are many world leaders, past, present, and I'm sure in the future as well, who have been diagnosed with certain personality disorders retrospectively or actively, or in the very least, certain personality traits. And a lot of them have a less than ideal public view. Most notably, the recent world leader who has started worldwide, I mean, an outright genocide. Yeah. So it doesn't help the cause for personality disorders when the media keeps publishing personality in this negative light because of the actions of these world leaders. And speaking of the media, if any of you have watched the Netflix series on Jeffrey Dahmer, um, they actually mention many times during the show that he's a psychopath, and you know he's actually retrospectively been found to have very little psychopathic traits as compared to a full-blown psychopath, like for example Ted Bundy, and instead he merely had a personality disorder. So a lot of this misrepresentation in the media can cause an increase in the stigma and provide less understanding towards personality disorders as a whole. Now, speaking of psychopathy, we have to address the elephant in the room. My neighbor is a psychopath. Should I be worried for my life? So, is psychopathy a definite indication of criminal activity, or is it something else? To understand that, let's just have a look at how the word even came up in the first place. So, the word psychopath is thought to have derived from the Greek words psyche, soul, and pathos, suffering. So, literally translates to suffering soul from a certain point of view. It's then thought to have evolved into the word psychopathology, German word, uh, credited to a German psychiatrist in 1888. It even gained clinical traction, and eventually it began to be replaced by the term sociopathy, which is why for some time it was used interchangeably by clinicians and academicians. And for a short period of time, the term sociopathy was preferred because they were still under the view of the group A, in which that they believe that psychopathy has this undertone of it being more of a genetic in origin, whereas sociopathy has it being more of the nurturing the environmental factors which made them the sociopath. And on the other hand, they also preferred sociopathy because the public would often confuse psychopathy and psychosis. They would refer to psychopaths as, oh, he's being psychotic, for example. However, when the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the third edition, introduced the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, the term sociopathy, sociopath, it fell out of modern clinical favor. And although we don't have a definitive diagnosis of psychopath in the DSM, it is something that we know is associated with antisocial personality disorder, and to a slightly lesser extent, narcissistic personality disorder, which is why I'm touching on it in this presentation. So, what characterizes a psychopath? There are 6 key characteristics which have been identified, namely lack of remorse or lack of guilt, shallow affect, a superficial charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, and manipulation of others. However, these are not the only characteristics. These are just the more common ones that are commonly found in diagnosed psychopaths. To get a better understanding, we can look at the PCLR rating scale, which has 20 components to it, of which is listed here. You can do your further reading as well and find out more about it. Some of the additional ones include impulsivity, irresponsible behavior, frequent marital relationships, history of juvenile delinquency, and so on. So, yes. Moving on to portrayals of psychopaths in the media. we do have the famous Hannibal Lecter, or infamous Hannibal Lecter, who was a cannibal, supposedly. We also have characters, fictional characters like the Joker or uh, Emperor Palpatine in the Star Wars franchise, and even the serial killer from the movie American Psycho, Patrick Bateman. But not all psychopaths are criminally inclined. In the real world, there are some non-criminally inclined psychopaths who have been retroactively diagnosed to at least have some psychopathic traits, um, if not the full-blown spectrum of psychopathy. For example, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, even Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. And to a certain degree, we've even found that evidence of psychopathy being in doctors, particularly in those involved in life-threatening surgeries such as cardiothoracic surgeons, neurosurgeons. So the picture listed here is from the series The Resident. It's a doctor series, and this is Dr. Barrett Kane. He plays, he is a neurosurgeon on the show. So is it a good thing or a bad thing to have these psychopathic traits? Well, research shows that incarcerated psychopaths have been found to have no dysfunction uh, associated with their generalized frontal lobe. And instead, it's more of a specific focal deficit in the prefrontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex. And what this means is that certain psychopathic traits may actually be beneficial and maybe even necessary for certain career. For example, the surgeon who's frequently operating in a life or death scenario, he needs to be detached from his patients. He needs a bit of lack of empathy. He needs to feel like he is better than everyone else because, in essence, to cut open into a patient and to save their life is almost like playing God. For the businessman, he would need to have some superficial charm to get people to do business with him. In innovators, they will need to be impulsive. They will need to think of things on the go, on the fly. And those who are prone to boredom, they might have a tendency to go into extreme sports or even become astronauts. And that brings me to this case, the case of Professor James Fallon, who is the self-diagnosed pro-social psychopath. So what happened to Professor James Fallon was that he was looking at some brain scans of serial killers as part of his research project, and he did find the same deficits of the orbitofrontal cortex region, and he was comparing it to a control group. And this control group consisted of 8 of his family members, including himself. And ultimately, the scans showed inactivity in his own orbitofrontal cortex, as you can see right here, as compared to a normal control subject. So what he found was that he actually has a lot of the symptoms of psychopathy. He just didn't realize it himself because to him, he was normal. But when he spoke to his wife and his children, they realized that, yeah, he did have some of the signs that he had these psychopathic tendencies as well. Um, Side note, he also has 5 major gene variants linked to aggression, but we're not talking about aggression in this session today. So at the end of the day, we realize that there is no good or evil in those with psychopathic traits. And as an extension, there is no good or evil with certain personality types or certain personality disorders even. Because personality is essentially a tool in which we use to live our lives. And to sum up, I'd like to quote Charles M. Schwab. He was an entrepreneur. Personality is to a man what perfume is to a flower. And what that tells us is that personality is just one piece of the puzzle that makes us human. These are my references, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ramin. It's just like it's 10 o'clock in Turkey, and it's a mind-opening presentation. And the point that you touch is really crucial because, as you said, this type of uh, actually personality disorders, we don't see them a lot in our clinics. We mostly see depression or schizophrenia, and we actually maybe at some points we know how to deal with them. But when it comes to the puzzling personalities, we don't really have so much experience maybe or many tools to deal with them because like um, communication is a key point with this kind of people, I can say. And it's really good to have some like clues at what personality is really means and how we need to deal with that. Thanks so much. Dr. Bland, do you have anything to say?
Thank you. I really thank a lot to Ramin. This indeed has been a very impressive presentation, and I believe it will be a good resource in our YouTube channel. It's I see that it's very well prepared, very well worked on, and talking about different aspects. It's really I personally need to watch it once more to discuss. Indeed, that's my feeling. And especially, I had in mind when we heard the title Puzzling Personalities, I had in mind to ask some notes or some views about some people who are in charge of uh, administering some workplaces or some nations or the world itself. And you have touched those a bit. Would you like to explore some more about that? And you have ended with Netanyahu. And we have some interesting positive aspects and negative aspects. And it's, of course, it's discussable, debatable, what to call positive or what to call negative. We are living through that now. Anyway, would you like to explore
Yeah, sure.
more,
Yeah.
please?
Thank you so much for all your kind words, Ferhad and Dr. Choshkun. And yeah, I think how I view it is that to be a world leader in and of itself, you would need there are certain personality traits that are basically necessary. You would need a little bit of grandiose self-worth to even reach that level of, being a world leader. You would need to feel a little bit larger than life to even reach that level. But when it becomes an issue is when certain populations or certain people or a marginalized group, is being specifically targeted as a result of, certain traits that this person may have. In the case of Netanyahu, I believe it's not really because of his personality that's causing him to react in its way. It's mainly because of his own personal ideals and his goals, his own personal beliefs. I'm not too sure because, well, fortunately, I haven't met the person before myself, but I think it's a very delicate and very tricky situation to for us to explore without seeing the person directly in front of you. And I think my point for that whole thing was not to, you know, say that personality disorders are the result of the cause for certain situations to be happening. I do admit that certain personality traits do um, predispose a world leader to behave in a certain way. But I think that we should also bear in mind that person's own personal beliefs, personal experiences, and maybe they have their own motivation for doing such things. Um, Politics is a very difficult topic for me to go into because it always confuses me. And yeah, politicians are a difficult breed to uh, analyze, I suppose.
Perhaps,
What are
may,
your thoughts?
yeah, may I say a few more words? As at the beginning of your presentation, dear Ramin, you said you talked about nature nurture and the changing throughout the uh, process, and maybe for the leaders there may be a kind of toxicity of being in power for a long period. There have been some studies talking about these issues. And as you say, having the power at any position, you are the major person to make decisions, makes you feel above the position you had before you started that position or that post. Well, if some kind of personality disorders are possibly, can we call it being cured, being treated? That's also something which is hard to talk about. Can there be anything done for such situations, and by whom? And
That's
of course, the question is to both of you. I wish we had some more participants in our session. Anyway.
yeah, that's actually a really wonderful question, and I think that's a struggle that we are facing. Now, I don't have much of my own personal experience in this. I'm still very much new to this, but there are evidences of certain therapies, like for example, dialectical behavioral therapy, which have been shown to help some patients, some people with certain personality disorders. But for a lot of the other personality disorders, I think we don't really have a definitive treatment or a cure per se, which is why I believe we should, as of now, our management plans, our management options for those patients would be symptomatic. So if it is causing distress for their interpersonal circle, how could we tackle those situations? Or for example, there was this patient I saw who actually had avoidant personality disorder, and he was he felt that he didn't want to have any really special relationship with anyone. He didn't have plans to get married. So one of the options that his treating psychiatrist offered him was to consider getting life insurance, at least in the very least for his parents, because there would be no one else to handle his affairs, should anything happen. So I think for now, these are the measures that we have in place. But it's also important for us to study and explore and develop more methods so that we could potentially help people in the future. That also comes with the caveat of, do they want to be helped in the first place? So that's another hurdle. That's another kind of worms that we're going to have to face before we can come up with something definitive. And I foresee it's definitely not going to be something that's an all size fits all. It's it's going to have to be tailored to each individual for sure, because personality is very, very complex. Yeah. Too many factors involved.
Dr. Bulan, do you have any other question to ask, or just do you have anything to say other than that, Ramin?
I would like to hear from you.
Actually, I was just like, actually, I don't have a lot of experience with this kind of patient. That's why, like, I only had some like read some case reports, or I watched some movie. Maybe you heard Sick of Myself. It's also about like narcissistic personality disorder, and it's just like when I watched it, I even think I thought by myself just how we can help this kind of like people in life, and it's really just like hard to manage them because as you say, they just like have so many defense mechanism that you need to like pass through and like uh, to to get connected with them that you can help them. And that's why, as I said, just probably the communication is the like first uh, degree treatment for this patient, because if you couldn't get communicate with them or connected, then you couldn't be able to help them, because you need to make them believe that you want to help them. I mean, and it's a like crucial point for my point of view.
I think we could have a broader look. I mean, we sometimes tend to talk about pathology, uh, disorders, and all the problematic activities. But as Ramin has put it in a very well form, that we meet different personalities at every occasion, everywhere,
Yeah.
at school, at home, on the street, around all our environment. It's not easy to call every activity or every behavior that we don't like is a pathological one. And it's not proper to try to change all the possible uh, behaviors that we don't like. Actually, if you like, you can try, but you won't, or we won't be able to do that. And should there be a way of being aware of what's going on? And would there be a way of talking on those behaviors which are related to or are consequences of the personality issues? Can we talk about them? The example you gave about James Fallon is indeed a very interesting one. He found out, can we call it a diagnosis? He found out that there was something to look or to focus on more in himself or in his close environment. And that's also a very interesting approach to work on his own family members and the other control group. How can you assign a few people as control group? I mean, we may end with suggestion, I assume. Let's talk about this, work about it, and have another session with other seniors and juniors to discuss more about these.
Actually, like for example, I can say that I have like one or two friends that I had some communication problem, and I like sense that there's something like off, and maybe I can even say that I can see that there's some trait of maybe personality disorder, and like I try to have some conversation, like to questioning their action, or like ask them question for like for getting them to understand their situation. But the first thing that I see that they're like, if people have such kind of traits, they are like so resistant. I mean, incredibly resistant. I mean, when you bring some example or like try to say something, they will bring up something else, and like I don't know what Ramin could say about something about that.
Yeah, here's my thoughts. Um, we can't change others, and in fact, there's a debate to be held that probably we shouldn't change others. But what we can do is change our reaction and our personal approach to these type of people. I feel as those of us who study psychiatry and psychology, and in particular these personality disorders, we're very privileged to have an understanding of these personality traits. So once we have studied this, one thing that I have personally found helpful is to be aware of certain personality traits in people, in even superiors, even my previous lecturers that I have noticed who have certain personality traits, and how I would like to approach them. What's the best way to approach someone who has narcissistic traits? You would never want to downgrade them. You see, it's things like these that can actually help to maybe build a bit on that interpersonal level a little bit. So maybe we can't change people, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves and how we deal with those people. And perhaps if we do that, it can make some small changes down the line towards, and we might change the whole paradigm of personality disorders later down the road.
We may also try to change ourselves. I would like to remind you about the window, the, the name of the window, about the different types of looking at oneself, either from your own perspective or from the other person's. What was the name of that? Anyway, I mean, for our own development, we should, as you have also said, we should work on, we should focus on our own relations with other people. Those, especially if we have some close relations with some people, with some friends, with some family members, we could think about and try to understand what are stimulating us, what are we behaving, how are we behaving, and what are the resources or the starters of those behavior. We can think about these. I assume, I think.
Yeah, these are wonderful, wonderful ideas, wonderful thoughts.
Yeah, that window was Johari window. We may think about that. Are you aware of that, or are you familiar with that concept?
I
Maybe,
I, I believe I've heard of the this concept before, but I wasn't aware that it's Johari's window. Yeah.
yeah, we can maybe start with that in the puzzling personality two discussion with this in the coming months. We can try that and looking at ourselves through the eyes of others and looking at people who accept being worked on. I don't mean diagnose. I don't mean, as you said, this is also very important, of course, on the dimension of physician-patient relationships. We can't reach any point if we continuously put our patients who come to find some solutions for their problems in some boxes. Yeah, this is in that box, this is in that box. And we should try to understand. And of course, at that process, we should also try to listen to our own selves. During my years of teaching, I had suggested my friends, my young friends, to capture their interactions, to video record, if possible, of course, with getting the necessary permission, to go over later, to see what we are doing, what that person is doing. And in my practice, I used to use this with people who came as patients. I would record it, especially in family sessions. I would record and I would watch it together with the people and try to be aware of what has gone through that interaction. This may be also this could also be discussed later, maybe. Thank you very much, dear Ramin, and thank you also, Ferhat.
Thank you both for listening intently
Yeah.
and not falling asleep, even though my presentation may have been a
No,
little bit dry.
it was great presentation. Really, thank you so much, Rami. Then I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching us. Have a great day.
All right, I'm closing the discussion. Hope we can continue on this later.